Hello and welcome to Return to Form. You are listening to the third of three festival reports from London Film Festival, which has, as of yesterday, concluded. There was a finale with some nonsense British film that we're not going to talk about. But there were some other concluding events that I attended and that Owen did too, including a Q&A with Jonathan Glazer and a special Q&A with Pedro Costa and Victor Erice. I've learned now to say his name properly.
Urethra.
Yeah, Victor Urethra.
Okay,
the
cool.
Spirit of wait, it's not even late enough for that.
Finish
that
the joke
kind
for
of
yourself.
George just wandered off set.
He's gone to have a piss, maybe, because he talks about exit host.
But hopefully, but we can begin to talk about these films. Owen, how was your festival? Overall experience.
Actually, the overall experience was broadly popular. Is it popular? What am I talking about? Broadly good. I think. My expectations were a little bit marred by the conditions of it. So the infrastructure.
My cat just
Amber fourth mic.
This is why you've got to watch our podcast, not listen to it,
because it's structural film.
It's structural film.
Yeah.
Things happen that we can't control.
Yeah,
my cat just climbed up from the sofa.
Yeah, so I had relatively low expectations. I think partly, like I said, the infrastructure and just the fact that it's in London and it felt, less, I suppose, less festive. But the actual programming, I think, turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah.
So no cap. It was good. I think we saw a lot of. I saw things that surprised me, which is always a good outcome of these experiences. I think when you walk away and think, okay, actually, it's advanced my envelope of understanding about film a little bit, and I think that's quite a nice thing. And when I left Berlin, I couldn't necessarily say that I had a great time, but I wasn't walking away thinking I've seen something, or several things that were momentous. And I think I have seen momentous things in the last few days. So yeah, how about you? Are you feeling?
Yeah, very happy actually. I've seen about 14 films, which is slightly less than the normal kind of festival intake. But we all, as London dwellers, we kind of melded these.
But that is still more
in
films than most people probably watch in a year at the cinema, right?
Far more. Everyone else is on their Michael Owen hours. George, how did you find London Film Festival?
Yeah, the same actually. I mean, it was, as I think we spoke about before, a bit diffused, a bit disparate, a bit lacking in. Big festival experiences. But what was on offer was quite heartening in the end. I mean, we even I saw 3 English films.
Yeah.
And
they weren't all terrible.
They were all right.
Yeah, oh my God, I saw an English film and I thought that was fine. That was good. Really good, actually.
So speaking of, let's get straight into those first 3 English films, beginning with perhaps the most hotly anticipated film of the festival, Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest. A very quick summary before we cascade into a rigorous analysis of it. The 4th film of British director Jonathan Glazer, who is famous for having quite a spacious filmography. He doesn't make films very often. He makes some of his living making adverts, which allow him to make.
Including the very, very notoriously banned Flake advert.
Oh yes, Flake advert. He made the advert with the
Dancing Devil.
Made the advert with the fireworks, the paint bombs exploding in the council estate. Anyway, he made Sexy Beast and Birth and Under the Skin. His 4th film is a attempt to document the Holocaust, specifically from the perspective of Rudolf Höss, the Auschwitz's senior commander.
Rudolf Höss, the boss of the camp.
The boss of Auschwitz, the top dog of Auschwitz, and his family and their various extended life.
19 children or whatever they have as well.
Say again.
They're 19 children or however many.
Yes, huge extended family of jolly Aryan kids running around. Yep. It's essentially a film about a workaholic. I think we've said it. It's about his challenge of balancing commitments to
work-life balance. He was suffering burnout and he was slow quitting.
Stick drama about a workaholic,
And it's filmed in quite a clinical, flat way on digital, which is unusual for a period drama.
Very much so.
And in the backdrop of all of this, you see the billowing smoke of the trains entering Auschwitz and of the smokestacks of the gas chambers.
Mm.
Owen, were you surprised by this, knowing that there would be a Jonathan Glazer film, knowing that it would be about the Holocaust?
We've been talking before about Jonathan Glazer, and you were saying probably as a function of his work as predominantly as a commercial director, that he tends to adapt form very easily. He adapts himself to form. So there's not really
he knows the brief.
There's not really a great deal side by side that connects. I think that connects these films. There's a certain sense of humor, sort of coldness, and artificiality about his films, I think, and a strangeness about his films that kind of connect them. But they don't, face to face, you could show them some on the street and they'd have no idea that they were created by the same person, and by the same intelligence. But the film itself is interesting, right? Because it's a Martin Amis novel, which is Zone of Interest, and it takes what for Amis was a slightly more, I suppose, slightly more complicated book in some ways. So Glazer's kind of boiled down the soup until it's something a little bit more rarefied. For Amos, there's multiple protagonists, and there's different.
And there's also a love narrative. There's a love story, right? Which
there's lots of different characters and lots of perspectives. So it's a bit more of a kind of total historical novel in some senses.
Does Glazer just sort of isolate one strand?
He isolates Hoss. Really,
but is Hoss the protagonist in the
film?
No,
so he's in place.
He's lightly fictionalized as some typically stupid Amos title, character title. I'll find the name now.
Yeah, it's basically Hoss, I think, and I think Amos researched Hoss's life for that book to identify him. Right. But whereas in this, Glazer's, spent meticulous hours in the archives and has kind of reconstructed Hoss as a kind of cinematic and I suppose post-literary figure in a sense. So, and yeah, it is interesting because it is in theory a bucolic study of bourgeois, because sort of petty bourgeois German family life in the 1940s as a period drama, but with, like you say, this present absence of the camp and the work that he's obviously doing in the camp, and the way it intrudes. I'm sure George will have loads to say about this when we talk about it, but when I pass it over. But the presence, and one of the things that I struggle with in this film is I thought it was fantastic. It did struggle with this tension between what it needed to withhold and what it needed to sort of disclose about Auschwitz. Really overdetermined, cinematically overdetermined place, and just historically as well. We know what it looks like. The only signal at first that we know it's Auschwitz is we see one of these very iconic towers.
Yeah.
From the train station, but we don't see them front on, which is how the photo is usually taken. Down the rails, we see it kind of we're sort of a 90-degree angle to it, so we see one of these towers. It's immediately evocative, and we know exactly where we are. We know the kind of landscape that we're in, and that this house is abutting it directly. So, so there's certain interesting decisions by which Glazer keeps Auschwitz at arm's length, and ways he kind of lets it percolate through. And it's already percolating because we know it's right there, but there's certain things, and sometimes it works really well, these little intrusions. And I think the sound mix in that regard is really good at that. And other times it was a little bit too flat-footed in terms of how it entered the film.
There's a sense in which any aesthetic dealing with something as vast as the Holocaust needs to take a distinctive and indirect approach, which Shoah does, and we were thinking about this in our review of Steve McQueen's Occupied City. George, what was your main feeling about the approach in Zone of Interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think to maybe wind back a bit and to just consider the stakes of narrative fiction making about the show in this regard. So it is different from the discussion we had about the McQueen. And there are a few kind of like obvious touchstones here. And I think one of them is obviously the critical response to something like Schindler's List. So, I mean, maybe I could just read this Godard quote.
Of course. We always welcome Godard quotes on Return to Form.
Dearly departed. But so he says, Schindler's List is a good example of making up reality. It's max factor. It's color stock described in black and white because labs can't afford to make real black and white. Spielberg thinks black and white is more serious than color. So he keeps faithful to his system. It's phony thinking. To him, it's not phony. I think he's honest to himself, but he's not very intelligent, so it's a phony result. I saw a documentary, not a good one, but at least you get the real facts about Schindler. Spielberg, meanwhile, used this man and his story, and this story and all the Jewish tragedy as if it were a big orchestra to make a stereophonic sound from a simple story. I mean, he continues.
Very cool.
And apparently in Frederick Raphael's slightly unreliable biography of Kubrick, he reports Kubrick having made similar remarks about Spielberg's film, and also when Schindler's List came out, Kubrick had himself been working for 3 years in kind of meticulous research on what would have been his big Holocaust picture, which he then tanked as a result. And so, I mean, it is a sort of watershed in the depiction of it as with movie magic and with lights. And
the prestige, total prestige of that.
And it is one that has then set the template for lots of subsequent depictions, right?
Yeah, which all these later films have to grapple with to an extent. That image of how the Holocaust is treated cinematically has been consumed cinematically, I think. Exactly,
and making it a sort of object for consumption. And so thinking about Zone of Interest, which I do think was pretty great in many ways, is how successfully it resists this, and how it kind of resists the snares of, I suppose, the making spectacular of that which should not ever really become like spectacle to be consumed, or or what point is there in making something spectacular out of this? Like, as we said afterwards, if you're going to directly treat it, Night and Fog is probably the be all and end all of that sort of mode of.
I think I'm pretty pro Shoah. I mean, the film.
No, I mean as in like. I don't think Shoah is a direct film.
No, because Shoah mediated through people's memory.
Okay. So in terms of if you want to do a direct telling, then
a narrative drama about But I think there's a sense in which we can talk about there's certain parallels, and I think Claude Lanzmann's Shoah is obviously always a reference point because it's so comprehensive and indexing of the aftermath of a brutal murder, unrestrained murder. But I think particularly with this film and with Glazer's treatment of it, there was certain moments where it tipped its hat, or it's kind of showed its hand too much about the thing we knew what was happening. So particularly with the character Hoss, for example, we understand what kind of work he's getting up to in a camp, obviously, and I think the film is successful when we see him almost as this Jean Dielman kind of character, going about his tasks, his humdrum tasks, dealing with the bureaucracy, dealing with admin, often camp-related admin, sometimes about disciplining members of the SS who were picking flowers from a bush, which I thought was quite nice.
That's a beautiful scene. So he kind of dictates, as he tends to do in his home office, a very angrily worded memo that the lilac bushes adjoining his villa are there for the edification of all the members of the SS, but they should not want to.
Yeah, it could almost be a little bit too sort of overplayed in ways, like but it's good. It kind of works with this character who's very precise, and in some senses he kind of fulfills this image of the partly fulfills this image of this Eichmannian style sort of precise clipped functionary for whom this is not a passion. This is a just work.
Just has done. Like job satisfaction and pride in what
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and
in one of the Q&As, I'm not sure if it was the one that you saw. I mean, I watched a few of them online, but Glazer sort of says that he was reading about Hoss, and he was like, he read in the Nuremberg interviews that happened, with all of the incarcerated Nazis before they got hung or took their capsules. There was a French psychoanalyst who went to go and meet him multiple times, and the kind of impression that this guy formed of Hoss was that he was a sort of flower collecting, milk toast. And at that point, Glazer instantly thought of Christian Friedel, who's the actor who portrays him.
Yeah, who does an amazing job and is actually very well.
Yeah, I mean,
he looks quite similar to the real Hoss, actually. I think you saw the photo of
I did. He's a relatively young man, but the interesting thing about Hoss is there's another psychologist. I know this isn't a podcast about Hoss, but I think it's
True
kind of
crime.
interesting in terms of the
True war crimes.
True war crimes, the verisimilitude that this film kind of is toying with. I think it's important to grasp what he's doing there, and I think Hoss, there's another sort of psychoanalyst treatment of him, who's pretty clear that he is was displaying quite psychopathic tendencies, a real indifference and lack of understanding of the crimes he'd done, and lack of remorse. But so with this Hoss character, we do see there are times when we see him within the world of the camp, and again, kind of indirectly. But at that point, it's kind of, you may as well just show the whole hog, because we see a scene where it's kind of a very brief scene, and we see him with his army officer's cap on, and there's screaming and sounds around him, and it's kind of a Dutch angle, and we're looking up at him, and we can see smoke around him, so he's obviously in the camp doing the killing.
This felt like almost music video in a way, and I think it actually did come closest to the thing that the film tells you it won't do, which is to kind of sensationalize what's happening. But I think it was a misstep. I mean, there are like very odd. I just want to give a shout out to like these very odd infrared but monochrome sequences that are where the Mika Levy soundtrack comes most strongly to the fore.
So these are a function also of one of the constraints that the film is imposing on itself, which is no unnatural light.
Interesting.
Because they're the exterior shots, which are not daylight, are not domestic kind of,
It's available light, most of those.
They had to think about how to do them because they wanted to include these, and also that is when we have the Mika Levy.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, the film starts actually with like a minute and a half of like some kind of overture by Mika Levy. It does have this.
But her music, if you think about it, doesn't come in at any of the other points, and instead we have just the sound design of the sound designer. I can't remember his name, but he's worked with him on.
Different person.
It's not Mika Levy, so they're working together.
So they're two separate basically sides of the.
Because ambiently, the sound mix for most of the film is this almost perpetual, constant rumbling, clattering, gunshots, and screaming. But
it was done afterwards.
Pardon?
It was obviously it was dubbed in afterwards, but the point is that. The actors portraying these kind of seeming indifference to the noises they're hearing is an actual indifference.
Because they can't really hear it.
They can't hear it,
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they're given direction on that,
No, apparently not. Apparently the idea was to sustain this state of kind of abject indifference on set. And then apparently they did one cut, and it sounded too pastoral by half, because you could hear they'd researched all the noises of the rivers and the rustling in the trees and all the flora and fauna that you'd have around Auschwitz, and then they kind of dimmed down the actuality of what the noises of listening to joining a concentration camp would be like. So the notes on that screening was, you made it sound like a country park or something like this. And so then, and if anything, I think there was a bit of an overcompensation the other way around. I think you agreed with this, Owen, that maybe there were points at which it
intruded too much. So there's a scene where the young son is playing in his room with his toys or whatever, and he overhears his father. There's an altercation with the guard, and I think they find two of the prisoners in the camp fighting, and one of them stole an apple or something, and he orders him to be drowned in the river, and it's clearly Hoss because they call out his name, commandant or whatever. And the son hears this, and the son's kind of like, you should steal or something, and he kind of reacts to it, responds to it, without understanding the gravity of what's happening, I suppose. But if we can hear it in this moment, we should be able to hear it all the time. And this is the one moment where Glazer allows very clearly this child to overhear this conversation for sentimental, I think not sentimental, for, I guess, sensational effect, because we go, oh wow, the child's overhearing his dad ordering someone to be killed.
I suppose
it kind of broke the kayfabe of, I suppose, really what he'd so carefully established until that point, which was this rumbling, incoherent, inchoate horror that we were kind of guessing.
Right, because very often it sounds like, basically, if you've ever lived in a flat which adjoins, like a tube, right? Yeah. And that is, I mean, that's the really uncanny state that it manages to perpetuate, is that like
urban buzz.
Basically, or living next to like Magnitogorsk, or next, in Port Albert, when the factories are around.
Industry.
I mean, it really gives this abstraction of like what is what is Daddy up to? Like they're all nobody in the domestic environment is prepared to ask the question of like what Huss is working.
I think this bit worked quite well for me. I think, but I think it is like a sliding scale to an extent of what like how far how extreme the device is, right? Because I think that like, I mean, at its best, it sort of almost feels like watching the Big Brother live stream, at like 2 a.m. Back when Channel 4 used to just like stream bits from the house, these angles that a bit like CCTV kind of instead of going from like a wide to a close up, it just goes from a wide to another wide, room to room.
They shot with 10 cameras.
Right, kind of fixed station.
They had fixed station cameras.
That makes a lot of
house
sense.
that they built they basically repurposed from scratch because the original house that Hoss lived in was still there, but they couldn't. It wasn't practical to evict the Polish family that actually lives in this building.
I heard a slightly different story, which is that it was fine, but they were not. It wouldn't work from a production perspective. It wasn't so much that I think it was completely possible for them to do it, but they decided it would be easier to find a house about 3 lots up, which looked vaguely similar, and they recreated it, the entire thing, and added this garden on, which they planted meticulously.
But they still had the Auschwitz in the background. It wasn't far enough away that it didn't.
But the wall is not. No, so I think there's a little bit of trickery. So they built this wall. That's not the wall of Auschwitz. That's one they constructed. I mean,
but all the kind of the series of buildings.
I think
I believe that can't have been built from scratch.
My eye was wandering over them, trying to work out if there was a bit of.
It does have this strange, like it sort of it almost like a blue velvet picket fence. Like it has this real sort of like homeliness. Like even though it's not like my taste as a home, but it has this like traditional homely. And when you see them like putting out the potato salads, I mean, the mise en scène is like some of the most impressive. And actually, that's something that all of Glazer's films have, like a very deliberate, purposeful mise en scène.
Yeah. And there was a bit of a taste in my mouth when I learned about the rebuilding, because I mean, there is also a Godard quite. I mean, he was always talking about Schindler's List. It was evidently a film that made like quite a big impression on Godard in some fashion, but he did say once, like, it's not going to be enough for them to just keep making films about it. One day they're going to rebuild the camps, for the purposes of
for total verisimilitude, right? To recreate this experience.
And what
second as fast.
There are many sides of this film that I think have a really commendable consistency and austerity to them, in the sense that like maybe 4 or 5 aesthetics decisions are made and then they are pursued consistently throughout the film, right? Without kind of falling privy to the like whim of just exploring things for their own sake.
It very much felt like, very often when we see a prestige period piece like The Killers of the Flower Moon, we often come away from these things thinking, God, it would have been so much better if they'd like shot it all in digital on still or like some kind of formal device, right? And I think when people like ask what we mean by form, I guess, and like when we talk about form and content having a relationship that is like dichotomous or like antagonistic, or connect or linked or connected, this is what we mean. I mean, when you're dealing with subject matter, when you're forced to deal with like subject matter that is loaded, heavy, emotional, historically massive, you do have to make decisions like this, and I think that's,
and they're more compelling because
exactly.
You compare it against not even Schindler's List, but more in the same weight class, a film like Son of Saul, which led into this very kind of steady cam over the shoulder, very intimate and up close and embodied, and very gory and very Alexei
It's the kind of toolbox of immediacy effects were missing, which was actually what was so impressive. I mean, like very, very few close-ups apart from the one that we've already remarked upon inside.
Which we thought was maybe a misstep anyway. But yeah, for the most part, we're in mediums, we're in wides, we're in these kind of like quite hokey. These quite hokey dolly shots in the garden, where he's wheeling the wheelbarrow and the camera just kind of follows him along, and it's this.
Yeah, and this tracking shot as well is like a bit controversial, because there was this whole discussion about that Capo was one of the first films made. I think Bradshaw even spoke about this, but there was this big discussion in Cahir about this film Capo by Ponteviquero. The guy did Battle of Algiers.
Oh, Pontecorvo.
Pontecorvo, yeah. So I mean, that was one of the first, big, spectacular Holocaust films, and that ignite this response within Kahir about the tracking shot, which was this kind of great spectacular feat of movie magic designed to kind of suture you onto the experience of the inmate.
Onto the train, literally, in some senses.
Yeah, well, I think that's appropriate. I mean, there's great tracking shots in show. I think the tracking shot is.
I love tracking shots. Great,
we're very pro tracking shots.
Yeah, one thing in this all of the garden scenes in this film were amazingly staged. I mean, they were like the use just made of this one little bit of set was quite beautiful because you saw the kind of insane rationalist logic that was kind of put in at her end, at his wife's end, into the maintenance of this and the segmentation of all the different flowers and everything else. You know, so what's happening on one side of the wall is just being enacted on the other side.
Let's just leave the house for a second, because there is a sort of third act to the film where the protagonist finds himself.
Before
in
we
Berlin.
get to that, can I just there's a couple of things I want to say about the kind of I suppose the bucolic or pastoral edge beyond the garden, the sort of wilderness beyond the kind of refined, ordered garden, which are these kind of more natural spaces, which have become a kind of, say the word, slightly liminal space, or a kind of interaction space between the ordered murder of the camp and the ordered sort of growth of the garden. Between like the raw and the cooked. Sometimes we talk about Lévi-Strauss, and I think the river, which they sometimes play out and swim in, becomes a place where these two worlds kind of interface in interesting ways. So
amazing scene.
Yeah, when he's in the river with his daughters swimming, and something flows down, this kind of brown, brackish stuff, and he's seized with enormous panic and kind of hurries his daughters out of the river, and it's implied, who knows what it is, blood, bones, body.
They're cleaning themselves, and he is the most forensic, of course, in cleaning his hands because he's the one privy to them.
He knows what it was, it's presumably body parts or something. So there's these quite amazing scenes where the river becomes this place where these things are a little bit more wild, and they kind of interact with each other. And that's the same space where we see these infrared night shots of this young Polish girl leaving food out at the work sites for the forced laborers. She's like leaving potatoes, and we see these scenes in this kind of amazing Harmony Korine style, almost kind of infrared.
Well, we haven't seen Aggro Drift yet,
but we know it's gonna.
It's Richard Moss, right? Like his photographer.
Yeah, it's Richard Moss. It's also that amazing Young Fathers video, music videos will show.
Well, Richard Moss does it with very rich reds, whereas this was in monochrome.
No, because he
did those works at the Barbican in the night vision that is used.
Yeah. Okay. The red is a particular type of Kodak stock that pulls out the advances, the reds, which was used for military applications in Vietnam. But so I just think that this river space is quite an interesting place. It's where him and his wife actually have quite I suppose the only moment where they have a sort of actual conversation beyond the functional, and where they really talk. And
apparently verbatim.
Open up.
It comes from some housekeepers having overheard it.
Wow, that's insane.
It's a great conversation.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite moments, actually, my favorite banality of evil moments, where she sort of says, it's when he announces that he's going to have to move to Berlin. And that they're all gonna have to move, and she protests. She says, "I want us to, we'll stay here, hold the fort. It's a beautiful house. We live such a wonderful life, just as the Fuhrer wants us to. I have everything I want here. And it is a very effective.
These Lebensraum settlers in the east.
It's very extreme, but it's a very effective moment of irony, because obviously we watch it, and we can't ignore the horrors that are happening in the background, and they are always. Except in this annoying shot that we keep coming back to, they are always in the background. Can we just cover the third act? We can't. I mean, this is probably the most important film to talk about, but we can't go on as long as we did the last episode. But the third act, he goes to Berlin. There are somewhat downfall kind of parades and cascades of Nazis all dressed up period appropriately.
Jonathan Ganzer.
Yeah, I think I think it somewhat loses its footing, but I wasn't lost in this moment. And I think the final ending where we jump ahead to present day Auschwitz being sort of cleaned by the people who clean Auschwitz now, and then cutting back to this kind of increasingly unwell Rudolf Hoss. I thought this cutting back, which had it not cut back, would have been a kind of fatal and very.
And I think what the sequence I've been thinking
cutting back was very beautiful
for a few days, and I think what it did successfully is it draws out the aestheticization of the contemporary kind of spectacle of
the museumification of this, space.
Of the space. And so what we see is that we see cleaners kind of like printing it off ahead of the various exhibit spaces in the chambers before people arrive, and you see how actually the forms of display sort of resemble a lot of contemporary art. It looks like a Christian Boltanski exhibit,
or Anselm Kiefer, probably quite intentionally.
Yeah, exactly.
Piles of things.
It's kind of this actual like verging into Hollywood kind of Holocaust kitsch in a sense.
Yeah, I actually at first I was a bit. I was less kind to that scene or that interplay of scenes, but I think it's kind of grown on me that treatment. I don't think it's as initially I was quite disappointed that he'd used that, but I think you're right. This sandwiching it between Hoss, who's walking down the stairs of this large grand office block in Berlin, and he vomits, and then we switch to this scene.
Looks down this corridor, and then we look down the corridor with him, and then we're in contemporary outfits, and then we
go back, and he vomits again and walks on. And I think that's
very Glazer because he loves abysses. He loves really obvious devices that actually do work. He loves this kind of looking down into the abyss, and then you're in this kind of banal version like.
Well, think about the end of Sexy Beast when we go underneath the swimming pool and we discover the kind of
under the skin as well is full of abysses, and then
literally it's got these, and he likes a passage or a tunnel, and I think sometimes he's literal, and I think sometimes they're kind of figurative. Like the beginning of the film, like we said, is this aural tunnel of noise, of music, and this blackness before we suddenly burst out into this red.
It's quite audacious. It's maybe like 2 minutes, 3 minutes or something, right?
Yeah. But I think, I thought his vomiting was really interesting, and it's suitably ambiguous, because he sees a doctor in the film. We think
he does have health problems. He's not necessarily just responding to the horrors that he's enacting.
But it could be that kind of reading, these sublimated disgust and objection of what he's doing. There's part of him that's aware of it, and I think it's suitably ambiguous, which I thought
we see various other traumatic kind of symptoms. Like one of the kids is sleepwalking, and the babysitter or the like live-in
the mother comes to visit and then disappears.
Yeah, but I was thinking more of the child care, the babysitter who lives upstairs, and she kind of can't stop hitting the bottle while she's looking at the furnaces.
I think that's so. I was more confused about it. So one of the things is that certain workers in the house are Jews from the camp, and we know this only because the wife says a remark to one of them. She says, "My husband could scatter your ashes in the fields if because the girl's like doesn't clean something up in time." And it's like, I was like, it's kind of interesting with that scene because it felt like I knew by that point that these were forced laborers in the house, or assumed they must have been. And I was like, again, it's one of those interesting kind of, I guess, narrative decisions for someone like Glazer. She's like, do I have the wife say it or someone say it so it's absolutely unambiguous that that's why they're there? But I enjoyed the ambiguity up until that point of, well, not enjoyed, but respected the ambiguity up until that point of not definitively knowing their status in the household. So when you see them looking stressed and shaking a bit, you kind of again, it's you kind of read into it, and it gives you a bit more. It treats the audience with a little bit more intelligence to probe that.
Yeah, and I think basically the film struck, apart from a few exceptions, struck the balance that it was very boldly and very admirably attempting to strike.
It was so good
between showing and not showing, and this is a sort of film that while we've expressed our nuanced scruples here, this is a film that I am absolutely already proselytizing about to people I know who don't see films that often.
Yeah, go and see this.
Because it is it's a bold work, and it's a surprising work, and it has a surprising effect. Weird effect. And I think we need to support this being done wherever it is being done. Yeah. Further thoughts? Are we complete? Zone of interest. Very interesting. From one British film to another, there's really no segue to make between Zone of Interest and Molly Manning Walker's debut, How to Have Sex. So I won't make a segue. I'm just going to start talking about it. Molly Manning Walker was for a time a very prolific cinematographer and began making short films, I believe, in the last couple of years. And this is her feature debut. It was quite a surprise for both me and George, who saw it at the festival. I'll give a quick summary of the plot. It's called How to Have Sex. It's about a trio of young English girls who make one of these visits to Southern Europe that people who've just completed their exams often make, to Malia in this case, to party and drink and have sex. Is what they're hoping to do. The focal point of this trio is Tara, the main character, who is on the poster. She is a virgin and is sort of uncomfortable about this and sort of hoping to make a splash in these various pool parties. The first night they all go out together, but they don't really fraternize with anyone else, and they get kind of hideously smashed. And then in the morning they befriend this group of people on a chalet just opposite, and including two. Well, there's a lesbian called Paige who befriends the lesbian in their group, and then these two chaps, Badger, a kind of somewhat tattooed Geordie lad, and his mate Paddy who's slightly more normal looking. But they're all kind of sesh heads. They're all likely lads. They're all cheeky chaps, and they all go out together. They get up to some pretty shocking kind of. I didn't really know.
Is it basically English spring breakers?
Yeah, it's like sort of Malaga, Marbella spring breakers. There's a kind of crazy.
Well, I mean,
scene.
we said I turned to you and like within the first minutes, it's like, "Mum, can we have spring breakers?" It's like, no.
Yeah, but it actually, I mean, there are lots of like, it's kind of in-betweeners movies-esque in the first half, and then in the second half, as
Kevin and Perry go large. If you're going to be listening,
yeah.
For the older listeners, yeah,
and the purists,
before my time. But yes, as you can generally predict from the first half, which is very kind of jubilant and frivolous, there is something lurking, something quite dark ahead. Tara goes off piste, breaks away from the group. Has she loses her virginity to this guy Paddy. It's, they're both a bit drunk. It's sort of it's not the most romantic moment, but it's consensual, and they have it. And then later on, she kind of goes missing. Everyone worries about her. When she returns, she gets sort of not very much kind of attention from Paddy. He seems to already have moved on, not be very interested in her. And then something very unpleasant happens between them in the following day. And there's this extraordinary scene. A lot of this shot is shot in kind of single takes, but there's this extraordinary scene where she is absolutely shattered, wanting to get some sleep, and Paddy kind of slides into her room and begins to kind of make for her, while her friends are kind of calling her friends who are all sort of egging her on.
Oh yeah.
One of her friends sort of calls and asks if she's okay, and like tries to check on her. Meanwhile, he's kind of like an octopus, kind of grasping around her. It's a very sort of suspenseful and painful and ultimately heartbreaking film, made mostly with very admirable restraint. And yeah, I liked it quite a lot. George, what was your impression?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, as we spoke about afterward, I think it was, it's not hard to have a pretty exciting depiction of like the early stage of the galdom on holiday, and everyone jubilant and like wasted over kebabs and like, oh, we got to get her back to the hotel. I love you, babe. Like this, And so you're with it for the first 30 minutes, sort of. I think, irrespective of who the director is or really what their cinematic chops were, because also, I mean, we haven't spoken about it, but it was buttressed by this great kind of UK EDM soundtracks. We had Disclosure, we had Hudmo, we had like
Jack Wabb was the supervisor on.
Really? Okay, nice. And the kind of make or break point does become, when you remember that this is an English film, the slide into a different tonal register, right? Because it could be so frequently mishandled, especially given not mishandled, just kind of and this is the point at which everything becomes over-determining and whatever looseness or kind of formal plasticity there is kind of goes away. But instead, for instance, we go to the moment when Tara, the central girl, disappears. That like this amazing void opens up in the film, which is sustained, and the way that she kind of emotionally calibrates the different reactions of the different members of her group is really very fine-tuned, because you see that like the girl who's meant to be her closest friend is hoping that the absence of Tara will give her an opportunity to move in on this other lad that they've met, whereas he and the rest of that party are like already concerned, and there just enough space is left for us to kind of really speculate on the like severity of what could have happened, and everything. We sort of instinctively replay the first half of the movie in our minds, so we then go through exactly the same process that all the others are going through, of trying to reconstruct the night, Yeah. And of course, we've only at that point seen partial instances of it. I think a misstep was that it actually then showed us replay.
Yes, although for the narrative with Paddy, we sort of had to see that they.
We had to see parts, but I think
she then has this whole adventure with these other people who never reappear, who aren't very important. She just kind of finds another crowd of people who aren't sort of bad or good. They're quite nice to her, and then she doesn't have a phone, so she just ends up getting back late.
It seems to echo
what the strip, I guess, in Malia. And by the way, the segue we could have gone for with Zone of Interest. Malia was, under occupation by the Nazis, so there is
almost everywhere was there. It
like
feels
Jersey.
like some of the places it seems to echo some of the critique we had of a film like After Sun, which showed us too much.
I mean, I wouldn't say this was something that bothers me at all when we're watching. It's just something that's coming up now that we're speaking about it. But we have this amazing shot down the strip, really into the vanishing point, where ballasted on both sides by kebab shops and all the rest of it, and you see this sort of wreckage of like whatever it is, kind of 6 a.m. and it looks
mountains in the background.
Yeah, it looks like Fallujah or something. It looks like a disaster zone. And then we cut back. We see the antics of her night before when she's gone AWOL, and then we see her returning down this same strip, like completely desolate, abandoned, no phone, in her body contrast and crying, and
wow,
and it's very well handled, I think.
Almost reminiscent of Ulrich Seidel, actually. That sort of sprung to mind at various points.
His film's about sort of love and commerce and travel.
Yeah, like an unsqueamish sort of approach to a quite extreme
Paradise Love.
Yeah.
And I felt it was like visually very self-assured and confident of itself. The way that this final confession scene in the duty free, which I won't spoil, is blocked, and this shot is really, really magnificent. I think
a lot of extraordinary moments of blocking. One massive reservation, which I think we can kind of talk about in depth as a group, is the use of what we're now going to call Foley dips.
Yes.
Which is a moment in a film where the general atmos is kind of turned down, or potentially a kind of EQ is put on it such that it sounds very heavy. And
it filters out certain, like exactly the kind of fullness,
the
of the
general
sound.
fullness of the sound, the higher tones, frequencies, and you start to hear the individual Foley of particular actions, maybe the touching of hands. Or kind of the opening of a bottle, or something that one of the characters notices. You might even have a close-up of this. And everything in the sound design and the mise-en-scène and the camera work kind of focuses in on what the character is thinking, or focuses in on what the character is looking at as a way of like gesturing. This happened in Horde so much, and it was a big part of, as a methodology, it was a big part of why I hated Horde. But in How to Have Sex, it happens quite a lot, but it doesn't. It sort of just feels like aberrant from the general approach of How to Have Sex cinematographically, which I thought was wonderful. but yeah, this technique and actually, I mean, in our Christian Petzold podcast, we talk about how this happens in Yellow. Like Petzold experiments with someone breaking a biro or something, and suddenly the sound goes down, and you can. It just seems completely anathema to what cinema should do, which
I'm
is
honest,
allow
I
you
think
to
it's a
find
technique
things.
which has been imported into art house filmmaking from commercial filmmaking, right? Like it's
It's sort of
some
Guy Ritchie almost, like kind of thriller.
yeah, also from this, but it feels like it's more familiar to like the beer advert or something when it like
Yeah.
this
Well,
pushing noise.
it's a
And you
classic
hear
Guinness.
you hear the clink of the bottle, and
Yeah.
then the
Yeah,
whoosh
yeah.
back out, and then the party comes.
Yeah, there's certain ways it's doing it. It basically is condensing sort of. I suppose it's a backdoor into interiority for these characters because it shows us what they're focused on or what they're losing focus about. I think it can be a little bit lazy.
Short circuit to it that doesn't actually accomplish.
No, it doesn't really help us there. And I think the problem is, I think it's often accompanied. So there's the Foley dip, and it's often accompanied with the snapback. So we'll sometimes get, and it'll often be accompanied with a cut. You know, it might be like someone's fully focusing, and then we get a slam, and they're like getting back in the car, and they've just shut the car door. We'll get these kind of things, and they're quite forced, and they like you said, they seem to owe a lot to commercial filmmaking, but also, I suppose, to Netflix dramas and sort of BBC drama. It's in this kind of quite pedestrian milquetoast style of filmmaking, which kind of makes up for nuance elsewhere by creating these moments, these kind of sharp peaks of focus. And I think
there aren't
ever seen it used
cheat
well.
code to truthiness in filmmaking. I mean,
No.
you can't just liberally apply this and hope
it's not sufficiently ambiguous.
But what was annoying about How to Have Sex is that it had essentially was already succeeding in depicting, particularly at the moments when it was most insistent upon the Foley dip. So when it was trying to show us, the level of kind of isolation and alienation this girl was feeling, both from her peer group and from the situation she finds herself in whilst on holiday in Malia, right? And here it was kind of instructive to compare it with something like Spring Breakers, where you have this sustained impasto audio soundtrack of like EDM, right? Of hype, trashy EDM throughout the entire thing, without any need to hollow it out in this fashion or do these kind of like
the wall of sound approach, which is Lynch, something Lynch has kind of perfected as well with Twin Peaks in particular. And actually, a lot of his filmmaking, which is this kind of perpetual din, and this quite confected sound, which actually becomes a character in its own right when it's sustained throughout a film. I actually think the source as well for this is probably going to be Spielberg and Ridley Scott in their own ways, in a slightly more elevated way, because Saving Private Ryan introduced that in a big way, this loss of hearing that then snaps back.
Right.
Well, it goes on an interesting journey, right? I mean, it comes from Come and See.
Come and See, yeah. So it's kind of horseshoe. It's kind of horseshoe almost. It's or not. It's just kind of come back.
Come and See does it in a beautifully literal way, because it's literally trying to convey the experience of tinnitus in war. And in a way, and also maybe it's more appropriate to use it in war than it is in like a nightclub. I don't know. Like there's like certain sort of registers.
Yeah.
And actually, Jonathan Glazer does use an extended Foley dip that never snaps back in one of the final scenes of Zone of Interest. I think, where where he's at this big hall full of Nazis and the sound sort of goes down and he's sort of just on his own. Again, I actually thought filmmaking was good enough. It didn't need to do that, but it didn't quite offend me as much as the way it happened in Horde, which I think where it was trying to stand in for good filmmaking.
You can overindulge on these techniques, I think.
And if the message is generally to say this person stands apart from their environment, then cinema already has
so many tools.
So many tools at its disposable in order
literal
to
camera
that information, which he used for the best part of 70 years of his history before this, or 80 years before this. Comes in as a method, so
it's symptomatic of a loss of faith in film and film's tools. I think it does feel like we're living through an era of the Foley dip because people have forgotten about the beauty, have forgotten their confidence in cinema to communicate.
Forgetting about the interplay of the camera and space. You think about even in its silliest iterations and most beautiful, which is filming at Tati with Playtime. How better to display the sort of urban alienation of character like Monsieur Hulot than to shoot him in these massive wides. You know, he's truly alone in these vast capitalist modern spaces, and that's a tool that's, you know, integral to film.
Absolutely.
You know, we don't see Monsieur Hulot slowly pressing his hand into the squeaky leather chair. And
that is a very true of Hulot. I mean, there's something really. I don't talk about Tati very much, but there's something in Mon Oncle and in all of his films. The sort of oddness of the sound design, always at a distance visually, has this really like kind of. It brings you closer. It makes you look closer and listen closer. But if you do this Foley dip thing, you're patronizing the audience, and you're basically not allowing them that wonderful agency that the spectator has.
It's creating a kind of path dependency about how you kind of pursue yourself through the film. I think you know, there's only one way to go in this moment. It focuses you too deeply, too closely on one specific thing, and doesn't trust the eye to sort of make it.
And it has all the subtlety of kind of a mid-rate DJ just kind of cutting out the
faders down,
cutting out the treble before a drop, and then just putting it back in. You know, it really is at that level of.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I will watch it though. I think I'll like to watch it.
Absolutely go and see How to Have Sex. I wish it wasn't too late to change the title, which is a ghastly and awful, annoying title. Although it's a memorable title, it will stick in people's heads. Certainly when I was in the press queue, people were kind of muttering constantly. Someone even looked at me and said, "Is this the Q4?" And I just was like, yeah. That one. And actually, I saw a red carpet interview. This is a bit of interesting kind of British film speculation, because this was funded by the BFI, whose kind of tastes we tend to be quite skeptical of on this podcast. But the director Molly Manning Walker sort of said on the red carpet, "Oh, I hope this film will tell people how to have sex better." I was sort of felt slightly, not that isn't an aim that I share, but I felt like the film does a lot more than just provide kind of
sex education.
Essentially, I felt like it was underselling the project, but I also understand that maybe that's sort of what you have to say, or how you have to frame something that's as nuanced and rich as this. And obviously, I do think it does. I think what was interesting about the relationships in it is it doesn't like diagrammatically tell you like something sort of banal about consent. What it shows that's very interesting and engaging is like the role that relationships and care play in physical intimacy. And I think you know, at the very, this is giving away bits of the plot, but like at the start, you know, you're wondering, when you see these guys, you're wondering like, who is she going to pick? Like, how is this going to pan out? You're constantly worried that someone you've begun to trust, like the character Badger, for instance, you know, you start to think, oh God, is he going to turn out to do something horrible? You know, there's this more handsome figure, Paddy, who becomes who's an old friend of Badger, and there's this wonderful scene after he's sort of he's, you know, hurt her quite a lot, where Paddy says, this is sort of zone of interest, banality of evil territory, but where you know, Badger sort of senses that Paddy's done something wrong to Tara, and he just sort of says, "Oh yeah, he's crazy, man. You know, but I've known him since we were kids. You know, he lived on the road, on the same road as me. Our parents, we used to hang out." And she just says, "That's cool." It's just like really icy. But yeah, there's something about the way that she has this affection. She initially thinks he's the more attractive one, and her friends were like, "You should go with him. He's much better than this guy." And and then it's his cruelty. It's his lack of care, lack of awareness or sensitivity, in his capacity as someone who is sort of romantically involved with the protagonist, that makes that like it's just. What I'm getting at is that the story has a beautiful and undogmatic nuance to it, which I feel the title doesn't. Even though, of course, it does tell you how not to have sex.
I think it's a tender portrayal of. I mean, it sounds weird to say this in the context of what the film ultimately portrays, but it is a tender portrayal of this sort of working class space, and it is not like a patronizing or a moralistic or an appalled one.
Correct.
Which regards it as, you know, like vulgar and debased or anything. I mean, like, it's, you know, even like there are these like gross kind of party games that they're all encouraged, this sort of forced fun sort of situations where they're all like a bit hesitant to get involved, actually. And yeah, I think all of this was handled like kind of. But what the question it begs is, you know, everyone makes a Bildungsroman as their first feature.
That's literally the word that was rolling around in my head. I was like,
What-
this is like
what
a
do they make
concentrated Bildungsroman.
Their second ones. Like,
Well, I'm afraid to say that the best British films are in the last 20 years have all been debuts. And some directors, Mark Jenkin, Peter Strickland, Jonah Hogg actually I think has kept.
Jonah Hogg has kept
Hog's
evolved
Hog's best film
interestingly,
is still
yeah.
unrelated.
But her best film is still unrelated.
Yeah.
But she's kept a
True.
higher standard than the other names I mentioned. But yes, there's the case of the dwindling debut.
I think a lot of these
she-
films come from quite personal subject matter often as well,
Yeah.
which means they kind of land with this grand idea. And like you said, George, often Bildungsromans, they're often reflecting their own personal, sentimental and romantic and aesthetic journeys that they're kind of casting onto film. I don't know what this director's background is really like, but it might reflect a certain, you know, sort of shared common experience of you know, university sexual dynamics and things like
I
that.
watched a short that she made during lockdown. I can't remember the name of it, but you'll be able to find it if you search her name. And it was made, I think it was made as part of some kind of lockdown filmmaking initiative. And it was unlike a lot of the films that were just shot on Zoom in a really kind of naff way. She sort of shot it through windows, and she was making a film about a couple where one of them was quite ill and couldn't mix. And so, it was blocked, but it was blocked in this beautiful way. She did this great thing with depth. So I think it's no bad thing to let cinematographers move up to the directing spot.
Yeah.
Because
Sean Price Williams as well.
True.
Sean
Sean Price was two sort of DOP come directors.
Though, shall I ring my little bell and say, "Gentlemen, time, please"?
Yes, very good idea. I'm sorry to leave you out. We discussed at great length a film that you haven't seen.
And I just contributed anyway because
your contribution to Foley Dip's discussion was much needed. Shall we run the gamut briefly? Well, let's talk about Totem, actually, a film that we
because
saw
spiritually maybe it feels of the same ballpark, maybe, and sort of relatively formally adventurous film, which is so Totem is it a debut? It's not.
Second film by Lila Aviles.
Film which is a Mexican film. I thought it was Spanish. More for me, it is a Mexican film.
That's because I said it was Spanish, so more for me.
But it's speak the same language. And it's shot in a sort of this intimate, over-the-shoulder, this kind of evocation of intimacy in a house in the lead up to a birthday. So it has a kind of Feston, Thomas Vinterberg kind of feeling to it. This is, again, quite a morbid film in some senses. The sort of the main character is really this young girl, sort of, and her mum, who we first meet on their way to the party, and we find out that the young girl's dad is dying. So he's got fatal disease, I think something like leukemia or something, and he's very wasted and has a full-time living carer, and he's sort of preparing himself for this birthday party that he knows will be his final birthday party. He's young, he's 27 years old, and so we're introduced to this kind of chaotic. This very like Alexei Goranman style apartment. There's bodies everywhere. There's no privacy. People are kind of like shitting and pissing and showering with everyone just running into the room. So it has this real corporeality to it, and it's very. I think it's not frictionless. This party, there's emotions are running high. Characters are getting drunk. Arguments spill out. There's misunderstandings. So it creates this very kind of rich, textured portrait of family life, which I found really compelling, very beautiful and very real in a sense. Even though it was very strange, there's kind of interesting devices like the father has his no larynx anymore, so he has to use one of these voice boxes, and it kind of adds this element of kind of quirky, Lynchian, dirty weirdness to the proceedings in what would otherwise be quite a straight-faced story of this quite somber melodrama or quite manipulative melodrama about a dying man turns into actually quite a weird evocation of the end of life, and it's quite celebratory of life in its scrappiness, I thought.
Yeah, the bittersweet tone is sustained throughout and kind of, well, intensifies actually. I think it's a very colourful film, a very beautiful, rich film, just visually. It's shot in a style that I'm sometimes wary of, but I think it comes off totally well.
It works here because it matches
has this floaty, over-the-shoulder vibe. It's told not entirely, but almost entirely from the perspective of this very young girl.
In that it was like playground.
What's her name? Sol. Sol is the name of the girl. Solitudo.
It reminded me of Playground in that sense.
Playground, very good.
Seeing we're often at kid height, we're seeing the parents' knees and bums and things like that, and it's I think it was quite
Tom and Jerry angle. No.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And also at times these these quite sublime moments where we focus on various creatures and animals, and there'll be a cricket or a bug or a parrot, and we go very, very close to them. Sometimes the kids are kind of poking them or regarding them or something, and sometimes not. There'll be a snail on a leaf. And we get these little. They're almost like these little interstitial moments of exotic elsewheres, I suppose, that are quite interesting, and they're not explained or rendered. They don't need to be. They're just part of this noisy, messy, rotting, organic living house, I think, is part of the tent with those, and I really liked that.
It's beautiful, and the sound mix as well sort of totally relates this. I thought it was very moving. I don't think we won't dwell on it for terribly long.
Yeah,
it's
fine.
basically just a great film. I saw it. I didn't see it at Berlin. It was at the Berlin that we were at, but I caught it at one of the special presentations that they had at London Film Festival, and the director was there, and she was an absolute charmer. She gave a kind of rip-roaring intro, very brief, and then answered questions at the end. There was one question from the audience that irked me so violently. It was from a woman who said, "I'm a filmmaker. And I just wanted to know the performances you got, British filmmaker, from these children were so intimate. I was wondering whether you had an intimacy director on set," which just the most extraordinary suggestion. I mean, there weren't any sex scenes, by the way, which is the only use there is for intimacy coordinators, which is, I assume, what she was referring to. But very kind of bizarre that she would think that. I mean, that it wasn't the director's job.
It just goes to show like
spontaneous performances from kids, and also kids are actually. I don't have a huge amount of experience directing kids myself, but like they perform well, and the answer that she gave was like, they basically did it. Like they basically just like, and you work with their energy. They're not as good at like giving you a particular thing each time, but like by working with the energy of these very young people. The film gains its own energy, and I think that's something very important.
Quite a charitable answer, considering the stupidity of the question.
No, of course, you should have just walked off stage.
Imagine asking something like Jerzy Skolimowski, probably.
Yeah,
punched him.
If it had been Pedro Costa, Pedro Costa's famous for just giving very short answers. I was watching a Pedro Costa Q&A last night actually on YouTube, and he said this amazing thing about how
it's very terse, isn't it? Yeah.
One of his films he made called Bones, which was I think the first Fontaine Hash film. He was very concerned that all the interesting stuff was happening behind the camera or left or right, not where the camera was pointing. And he says you've always got to make sure that the camera equipment isn't too unwieldy or the set isn't too slow, that you can't suddenly move around and capture the thing that's most interesting. And I felt that Totem managed to achieve capturing the most interesting
it does what this camera technique or this modality of filmmaking is supposed to do, which is it's supposed to make you feel like you're there. That's really that is what this camera technique is for. So lots of people use it. Our director's always aware that that's why it's what it's for. It's to make you feel like you're in this space, and you can.
It was immersive, but it wasn't uncomposed, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it still found moments of to frame really interestingly. In this moment, I liked its controlled chaos. I like the fact that they light these lanterns and they go up, and then one of them bursts into flames because it hits a candle, and it just creates this kind of non-perilous chaos that kind of spills out. And there's some moments of interest, sort of strange intrigue in the film as well. This thing with these paintings that are getting shipped off.
Oh yeah. There's nice things that aren't tied up.
They're glanced at, and then
there's like sort of darkness running through it. and difficulty, and something that maybe in a Robin Östlund film would sort of become a real kind of like would really feel like, you know, stepping barefoot on some Lego. But actually, in this film, the kind of middle class angst is just like ambient, and like you're more drawn.
We experience it as a child.
Yeah,
I think,
you're more drawn towards the like playful aspects, the aspects that someone who doesn't have adult responsibilities would notice. And I think that's quite a beautiful approach. It's a childlike film about childhood, but about being a child and dealing with something that
really momentous,
really grown up and really painful.
Yeah, so good. Great film.
Great film, Totem. Go see it. It is going to be released. I'm going to start, when I like a film, I'm going to start being a bit evangelical.
We should.
Because Lila Aviles reminded me of this box office quirk, which is that if you don't see a film on its opening weekend, then it's sort of unlikely to, you know, be booked for multiple, even if you do, you know.
Yeah, they judge by that opening weekend. That's
exactly.
Sort of
So see it
metric.
in December on the opening weekend. It's distributed by New Wave Films, who are also distributing the Victor Erice film, which we will talk about later. But now, shall we segue, since dear George is here, live from Berlin, recently arrived from London, to 4 films that George saw on his own while we were all doing.
Actually, I think it was a hit and run.
Yeah, we'll give you a timer. We'll give you 2 minutes. 2 minutes on each one. No. 1 minute. No. 3 minutes.
No. Are there any that you think need more?
Hitman. What you saw? You walked out of Hitman. Why did you walk out of Hitman?
Yeah.
Right, Hitman, I gave a total of 20 minutes. So, I mean, Hitman is from Linklater, who we may know from such films as the Before trilogy, School of Rock, Boyhood, the
Slackers, Dazed and Confused tape. Some of the early ones.
I mean, sometimes charming, whimsical, very often deeply nostalgic, but you know, not unlovable. This was profoundly drab, naff. Nothing. I mean, it almost felt like it was a fulfillment of some sort of contractual obligation film. Like, but then I checked his IMDb, and it turns out since Boyhood, he's cranked out about 4 of these sorts of light comedies. The premise is basically a kind of Ned Flanders style. Milk with Toast gets, who is a psychology prof at a high school, gets roped in to become a hitman. Which, as implausible as it seems, has a grounding in real life or something. And he proves to be very good at it. At bet, that's as much as we get. And with all the exposition is done via a VO in the like first 2 minutes. And
Never a good sign.
And I couldn't stand it. I mean, the problem is when you're watching one of these things in the setting of a packed out BFI NFT1, and everybody else is having an uproarious great time, and the only function of this sort of completely cinematically maladroit film is if the gags hit, they hit. If they don't, I mean, what was I going to do? So I just left. It was
for you.
Profound
living out your truth as you must.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to
so next?
Anselm?
I voted with my feet on this one, I'm afraid. Yeah.
But you also saw Anselm by Wim Wenders, the new film by Anselm Kiefer.
Stuck out. So this is a slightly more querulous one. So this is like the second film that Wenders has out this year in various competitions.
He has a fiction as well.
Perfect Days.
Perfect Days, which we didn't see. But in this kind of twilight stage of his career, Wenders seems to have settled out into becoming a kind of kunstlerfilm documentarian of various people he respects and admires, which is, you know, a venerable, tried and tested route. At Locarno, I saw Barbette Schroeder film about a French painter mate of his. So, you know, it happens. This, however, was, I think, both the wrong subject and the wrong way of approaching it. He chose Kiefer, Anselm Kiefer, who, for listeners aren't aware, is a blue chip German painter, studied with Joseph Beuys, who is in the popular perception known for having kind of broken the silence around German guilt in the 70s through various, and then had
And
settled
also
down.
about the ability of women to paint, famously a couple
But
of
that's
years ago.
Basilisk. That's Basilisk.
Was
Basilisk.
that Basilisk? Oh, sorry, I've confused two equal.
They're in
equally
the same
imperial
generation,
Germans.
pretty much the same.
I'm terribly sorry to Anselm Kiefer for almost slandering you there, but Basilisk does outsell Kiefer, so I don't know if that stands for much.
True. Kiefer is still fairly profitable, but he basically is purveyor of these large, gloomy impasto landscapes, which are cranked out on an industrial scale, often with bits of hay kind of incinerated in the mix.
That's so damning.
Sorry. I do really think
it's kind of accurate though, but it is.
I think
exactly.
He was great once, but he has since the 90s cranked out kind of industrial shower kitsch on a really quite alarming scale. Also, has endangered a lot of the gallery assistants who've had to work in their spaces through painting lead on them.
Yeah, painting lead, melting, kind of burning, all of these chemicals.
And there is a film about him already by
There's
Sophie
already a
Fiennes.
film about him, exactly, by Sophie Fiennes, which I think is superior to this one.
Over Your City's Grass Will Grow. That's the film, yeah.
This kind of purports initially to be like the Fiennes film, Over Your City's Grass Will Grow, which is a line, I think, from Celan, which is the name of the painting that he takes in the 80s. Which is just to kind of dwell in the wonder of this kind of Neverland-style world, this Graceland, this rich man's paradise that he's built for himself in southern France. Do you know where it is, Boussac or?
Yeah, is it something? I thought it was I thought it was central France. It's close to the German border, if I remember. But he's moved subsequently his studio for some, presumably for tax reasons.
Barjac, yeah. So it's the kind of world he's created there. With all
it's a kind of Dixieland in a strange way, like
kind
post-war
of
guilt Dixieland, natural history of destruction Disneyland.
So what I found profoundly irritating about this film is that it kind of uses the toolbox of cinematic effects that Wenders has honed pretty much since Himmel über Berlin. For instance, often this use of this like polyphony of different whispered voices on the soundtrack, which is meant to suggest this interweaving of past and present historical memory, etc., which was is used quite effectively, I think, in Himmel über Berlin. I'm having an expat moment here. What's the title?
Skies over Berlin, or
is it just
called?
Himmel means sky.
Ober Berlin.
Have you started forgetting English words, George?
And German, apparently.
Wings of Desire.
Wings of Desire. Yeah.
So you remember the scenes in the library, for instance, or on the
where Bruno Ganz is just kind of
on the subway when you have all these voices melting in and out of each other. So here you have this, but they're just kind of rambling, incoherent bits of porcelain or Bachmann, and the film seems to suggest that artistic activity is anchored in the wonder of a child and about sustaining the child's approach to the world. And to drive this point home, we have a young version of Anselm Kiefer who is dramatized in various scenes, walking, kind of scrawling in his notebook or just walking through the room.
It's very like Peter Greenaway and Peter Greenaway's treatment of historical subject matter.
Exactly. And it's
like quite a hokey device that's used on it's very History Channel, but it's like
very
elevated History Channel kind of motif.
It's very like Arte documentary for like German treatment of culture, cinematically like completely flat-footed, and so it does this. It also doesn't at any point interrogate the fact of like what is sustaining this world, like this world he's created himself. It seems to just be sustained by this man's imagination alone. So we have him falling asleep with a volume of Paul Celan's poems on his chest, and then you have these kind of dreamy like saccades through the enormous warehouse where they're pumping out these paintings. There's no suggestion that these paintings will eventually arrive in some like Frankfurt banker's apartment to be hung over his.
So it's kind of divorced from the
absolutely, and then
productive economy.
What is bringing the materials in? What are the constituents of success? There's no suggestion that like.
Because the most interesting thing about Kiefer is his relationship, his critique of his romantic critique of industrialization and mechanized warfare, and yet his total reproduction of that at an industrial scale in terms of how he produces his art. That's the interesting, maybe unintended or emergent dissonance at the heart of Kiefer's practice that makes me have a real soft spot for him. and it's weird as well because it did not engage. It's interesting he's focused on Salam because his big concern over the last few years has been like string theory and in molecular biology. He's got this kind of mad.
Yeah, none of that came in. It was very much
Yeah.
Hum's focus. So we had Salan reading on archival footage, and it also, like, when it lost its way a bit with just the documentation of him in various states of wonder in and around his own work, it began to rely on archival footage, and it only allowed itself to kind of critique the status of this kind of now institution, this untouchable institution of German culture, through the lens of this archival footage, where you actually see that there were various critics throughout his career who were challenging him on the reproduction of particular motifs, but even then it kind of projects them dreamily over his existing spaces.
So it's doing almost this kind of immersive art experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Van Gogh
I think it ended up creating this like sustained fantasy depiction of what of kind of like death kitsch or whatever else, but it didn't it pulled its punches at almost every turn. That's why I preferred the Sophie Fiennes one, which kind of sustains this dreamy mood of wonderment, and I think had it done that, it would have been a more successful.
We also hear, I haven't seen this other film, but in Sophie Fiennes' film we actually hear a lot from Kiefer himself at his kitchen table, talking quite precisely about his creative practice. And
exactly. There's not so much of this. Instead, you see this kind of lazy emperor just parading around, flinging bits of paint and kind of turning on his flamethrower pseudo randomly to douse different canvases. Whilst his assistants look on.
The emperor has no hose.
Yeah, something like this. When you watch a film like this, you understand what sustains and kind of generates certain misconceptions of like artistry and artistic practice, and how various kind of 19th century dogmas of kind of genius persist in spite of changes in artistic activity in general. It's not that we don't believe in genius, it's just it doesn't look like this.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you like to continue this run with Sky Peals?
Yeah, let me just refer. Yeah, so Sky Peals, Moin Hussain, I think it's his first feature. Shot on film, quite an interesting depiction of suburban alienation. So it's all set in it's about this guy Adam Mohammed who works in a burger joint in a service station, motorway service station, and is dealing with the loss of a father that he never knew, but turns out to have been a kind of regular customer in and around him. So he's already this sort of spectral figure. And it has lots of the elements of a kind of social realist kitchen sink affair, a kind of hatchet-faced love interest who is his colleague at the burger place with his young mum, and with whom he has a sort of like series. He's a little bit on the spectrum, fairly awkward encounters at one of the burger night socials. However, it introduces, I partially through the cinematography, which is it's quite muddy, but makes use of the strange synthetic kind of sickly glow of something like a motorway service station to pretty interesting cinematic effect. It introduces I won't spoil it, but a strange premise, which it doesn't then reconcretize or make or explain away, which is rare for a British film, I think, to introduce this note of indecision or ambiguity and let it linger rather than deciding to reinscribe it again into something literal. For instance, Owen, you've written about these drug experiences which allow for like the phantasmagoric to come in for like 10 minutes of the film and then just contain it.
A sort of guest star 10 minutes of
whereas in Sky Peals, I think it quite successfully managed to bleed out and suffuse all of the other parts of the film. And the wider environment.
Is this an endorsement of this film? So is this a film I should chase down?
Yeah, check it out. I think definitely check it out.
Distributor? Does it have one?
Not sure actually. I didn't look into it.
Who was it? Did it have BFI logos at the start? Or
Yeah.
okay, so it might get distributed by the BFI.
Yeah. Potentially. Yeah.
Cool.
It was in Critics Week as well, so I think Venice.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Okay.
Jolly good. Do you want to do a quick Hamaguchi before we?
For 4.
Yes.
Then we should reset.
This is undoubtedly gonna go gangbusters. So it's worth
ham.
an appraisal too. Okay, so Hamaguchi. I'm sure none of us were that taken with Derive My Kaya, the Oscar winner from this Japanese director. However, I did quite like the other film he put out in the same year, which was The Wheel of Fortune.
The Fortune and Fantasy.
Wheel of Fortune and Forgetting, I think it was. Which was a kind of episodic.
No, it was fantasy. It was Fortune and Fantasy.
I remember how Owen said it.
It was fantasy. Okay,
what did I say?
We get our last episode. We had a few
clubs. Okay,
people correcting us on stuff.
We made a few little.
So I don't want to get too.
Are you going to do some erratum now? Just run down.
Oh, I mean, it's a long scroll of lists of many varied mistakes and crimes.
Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy.
Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, right? Which I thought was I mean, it was a very literary film. It also looked like shit. I mean, it looked like television.
Yeah.
But
it was fine. It was fun.
Was actually quite interestingly directed and
I thought so.
Romarian, I thought. Anyway, so this new one, he's got a new DOP from both of those films, and it looks much better. So it's a rural community. It's a little bit Fargo. It's a little bit Manchester by the Sea, actually. This sort of lots of people in beanies collecting potable water from the river, and for the first 2/3 of this film are still pastoral and trying to suggest a kind of what the title indicates, which is that evil does not exist. It's this state of respite or calm, these simple people living simple existences. And then we have the intrusion of these kind of urbanites from Tokyo who are planning to set up a glamping resort.
So it's a sort of gentrification,
right? Which then is meant to introduce the one note of tension drama, which means that for the first at least half of the film, the main point of dramatic tension in the film is the introduction of a septic tank to which was profoundly irritating, because this was really all that was going on. Everybody was unflaggingly polite to one another every time. There were seemingly no class tensions between anybody, and this was it was a kind of bourgeois fantasy in which evil does genuinely not exist. And initially I thought, okay, he's sending up, he's kind of pillorying a particular mode of genteel art house filmmaking. I'm thinking something like the most egregious example I recently saw was Petit Maman by Celine. What's her name?
But in Drive My Car, he is doing his own genteel art house nonsense, right?
Yeah, but also there's quite a clinical and alienating film in some senses. You know, that's one thing you can say about Drive My Car is it's quite good at communicating an ambience of sort of urban diffidence and anime. Like it's
yes, and this is not an urban film. This is like this is an urban filmmaker trying to lionize a kind of rural population, and
so you think it's sincere? He's not sort of opening this up for this idea of this perfect bucolic.
Well, no, I think it's sincere but ineffectual. It kind of tries to get at this this like untutored profundity and kind of stoic wisdom of this one character who is able to eventually advise these urban incomers on why they should not place what they've placed, the septic tank, right? But I was profoundly bored by this point by the septic tank.
It's a load of shit.
The final third of the film takes a lurch into far more interesting terrain, but it's not really deserved. It's like an annex that has been built onto like a beautiful abridgment to a film that doesn't really belong there. And at this point, evil does exist, and there are several really.
This premise seems utterly contrived.
Yeah.
And the title is almost as bad as How to Have Sex.
Right. I mean,
I
could be wrong in his motivations here, but I did feel that he was sending up, a certain model of.
So it's like a satire.
Well, if it is, it's very light and astutely, very kind of adroitly done, because it is every time you think that the tensions, but for instance, between these urbanites and the rural community are going to escalate, and that there will be some sort of flashpoint, it simmers down. And it's right. Placated, and they buy him off or something. And playing in the back of my mind was the film we recently saw, Europa, which is much less naive and much braver, I think, in kind of confronting reality.
It sounds kind of in some ways, it's kind of giving Kelly Reichardt First Cow. This return to Earth, this return to sort of the natural and the organic and the.
No, there is a lot of Reichartian kind of like the pleasures of just watching simple people do simple processes. So, for instance, there is an ongoing motif of this kind of groundskeeper character collecting the water, which he then from the stream, which he then distributes to various members of the local rural community, and then the kind of rootless urbanite cosmopolitan man from nowhere who comes to sell a glamping resort to them becomes fascinated by this process and wants to do it himself. He also wants to use the axe to chop the wood. I wasn't really so taken by this because we've seen it depicted more interestingly, and a lot of it was very formally drab, very slow, very and very kind of contender and cutesy and like manga, to be honest. And that's what I also felt. Even when I liked Wheel and Fortune and fantasy, it was manga. It was kind of saccharine sweet, and the baddies are such execrable baddies that it's just like.
Yeah, I just don't think Hamaguchi is that interesting a director.
The final
he goes gangbusters.
Just a little kind of, to me, it was I mean, I don't want to be run a charge of Orientalism here, but it was like an actor seppuku. It was just like a way of disemboweling his entire
film.
With such a lurch into kind of I mean, I haven't seen his whole oeuvre, so there could be areas, but I highly doubt it actually where he's done this sort of thing before. And it will displease the sort of audience that so adored Drive My Car. So,
but it didn't wholly please you either.
I mean, the final part did. It just didn't. It wasn't earned. It wasn't deserved. Sorry, it's hard to really give a coherent treatment of what is.
Yeah, so go and see. Turn up an hour late
coherent film
to the new Hamaguchi film. So, listeners, George has now departed because he did not see the two films we're about to discuss. It was a momentous finale to London Film Festival for me personally to see the new films by Pedro Costa and Victor Erice. One of them was, of course, a fully fledged feature-length effort from famously a director who very rarely makes films. This is his fourth of four.
He's an 82-year-old man, Victor Erice.
84-year-old,
84,
somewhere. He was born in 1940, so yeah. He was
born in his early 80s. So he's
he looks great for it actually.
He looks remarkably together. His output, while slim, has always been considered. I mean, Spirit of the Beehive, his kind of debut. From the 1970s is widely considered to be the great Spanish film in a lot of regards, and it is. I rewatched it recently, and I watched it for the first time. Watched it for the first time a couple of weeks ago in anticipation of this, and it's extraordinary, mesmerizing, strange, ethereal thing. And then he made El Sur, the South, which was largely considered to be compromised in some senses because funding was pulled halfway through the film. It was finished in some senses, but wasn't the complete thing that he had intended to create. And there's the Quincy Sun, which is a study of an artist, which is good. It's fine, and he's made lots of well-regarded shorts in between. But this is his first really big feature since his debut in some senses.
I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, it's Quincy Street Sign is like 2 hours, right? It's like
Yeah, but it's a documentary.
yeah, I
you know,
suppose
really,
it's quite a
it's
constructed.
constructed documentary. So
it's
his
sort of
first-
like Quincy Street Sun is like the only way as Essex for like kind of like artists, you know. It's
for the
like,
kunstlerfilm,
it's
as
kind of
George would call it,
constructed reality, you know.
Yeah. So that's the
yeah. There's
grounding
something like
for-
beautiful and unique, and also very like direct about all of his films, and they all revolve around a certain sense of magic felt in the creative experience. But none of them probably direct their attention to this in such a bold way as Close Your Eyes, which is his newest
latest
film.
Because it is much more literary. In
Yeah.
a sense. It's a very, very delicately fabricated story.
Yes.
And you know, it's very dialogic.
The world building goes deep.
It really
this
does.
film.
This is the most interesting about it because it's very dialogic. It's very conversational. Has quite a broad, large cast of quite interesting characters. You know, it's this sense that what he is. A thought just completely escaped my brain. That's worrying. So
Shall I say a little
talk
bit about
while
the
I try and
premise of the
chase my-
film?
you do the premise, so I try and remember what I was actually going to say.
So we begin with a very ornate, restrained, and beautiful art house film that we assume is made at some point in the latter
Shot
half
on
of the 20th century.
celluloid, I think.
Shot on
Shot film,
celluloid, yeah.
yeah.
With like the same kind of like icy grain of Spirit of the Beehive. And it's the beginning of a film called The Farewell Gaze. And it's about a man who wants who's instructing someone who, a Jew actually, who's instructing
private investigator.
a private investigator who saved him during the Holocaust to find his daughter who he has become estranged from because he's dying, but he wants to see his daughter for the last time because
she's the last
living
lineage of his
lineage.
She's the last living blood relative, basically.
And before he
in the
dies, he
world.
wants his last relative to look at him the way that only a
regard
relative
him.
to regard him the way that only a relative can look at. So already it's establishing this kind of like precious sense of like the experience of looking and also a sense of connection and loss. It just establishes all the themes of the film and also a wider theme of the film, I would say, is the fact that I thought Victor Erice was dead. I didn't know it. I never read it anywhere. I just assumed
You had a
because
sort of Mandela
because he
effect.
stopped making films a long time ago, and because so many of the greatest filmmakers of the 20th century died in the last
They
15
get cut
years.
short, yeah, and I think the film engages with this, but I think quite playfully, with this sense of his own absence from filmmaking, and it doesn't try to explain it or justify it. It doesn't need to justify it. You can make as many or as few films as you want, but it does engage with the idea of in this film. It concerns a missing daughter and a missing actor, which we'll get to, but it also concerns Erice's own absence from filmmaking and his own kind of ghostly presence, the continued kind of pulsation of films like Spirit of the Beehive and Quincy Street Sun. So it's absences and presences, which I find very interesting, and the thing it creates overall, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but is this what Raymond Williams calls a structure of feeling. This kind of it is a film of feelings and senses and sensations, and that's its most kind of compelling part, that work at all these different storied levels, which is because after this faceted film within a film,
the film then resets and establishes a different reality related to the film we've just watched. And it's set not in the present day, but in 2012. So we watch a film set in 1947 that's actually made in 1990, and then we see the filmmaker of that film in 2012 being contacted by a somewhat trashy documentary,
unsolved cases,
TV documentary about unsolved crimes cases, missing person cases, and the actor of the film is missing, presumes dead, but no one ever found the body. No one knows anything about him. And then the film then goes on to discover someone who might be the actor, and it kind of it toys with these themes established of memory, of loss, of people changing, of the ability of cinema to capture like to sort of like capture someone's essence.
And also to fool and mislead us, because this is an important part of, I think certainly Spirit of the Beehive, because that also is a film within a film, because
they watch Frankenstein.
And Frankenstein, the sort of character, the presence of Frankenstein bleeds through into the experience, the malleable experiences or the malleable emotions and mind of a young girl who becomes obsessed and fascinated with this figure of Frankenstein, or the monster, just say sorry, and is unable to really distinguish between reality and fiction. And her sister says to her this very powerful line, which is, it's not real. The little girl didn't die. Cinema is just lies and trickery.
Yeah.
And, he's got this very good, amazing. Victor Erice has always been able to say, cinema is a falsification and a lie. But beyond that, there is a sort of strange, prehistoric, primeval magic there, nonetheless, that is, sort of always operating. So it's always operating between like manipulation and something stranger and more intangible.
And in this sense, I think it's worth talking about the different textures and registers this film works in.
Oh god, it's so. I mean, almost gonna.
It does this thing that actually Twin Peaks: The Return does, which is to sort of take people from one setting and one register and one texture, and then see them later on older in a different register. It uses also this. I mean, it's filmed, I assume, on like an Alexa or some kind of very industry standard cinema camera that has like quite a smooth, flat image. Well, not flat, but like shallow depth of field, but like very crisp image. Where scenes, largely quite dialogue heavy scenes, but filmed in a very restrained and tense way, moving between sort of close up and kind of coverage, standard coverage, where something unfolds, some sort of gradually discoveries emerge about the histories of all these people. But it's basically a lot of people who are living in the past, not only people as old as the protagonist, the director, who's kind of in some sense looking for his former actor, but also the daughter of the actor who's
never had the closure.
Yeah. She works in a museum now, but you get
again
the sense,
very telling that she works in the Prado and
exactly.
an art gallery.
She's also the actress. She is also the young girl in Spirit of the Beehive.
Is she?
Is this news to you?
It's news to me. Oh my god,
very, very
so
important
interesting.
detail. So
there's also
that's a very sort of Twin Peaks-ish thing.
There's also a line in the film which is a direct line from Spirit of the Beehive.
Oh really?
I found that afterwards in the.
Is Erice lore?
He's brought up an amazingly complex nested lore.
Yeah.
In like 2 or 3 films.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, and I think like I said, there's these textural registers and tones that the film establishes and then shifts, and they never felt as like jarring dissonances, partly because we get these slow fade to blacks between key scenes. It lets us breathe. It's a blink. It's the closing of an eye, right? It gives us this closing of these eyes.
Very gentle film in that way, I feel.
Extremely gentle, and yet so something. When I came out, so I saw it before you. I came out and I was like, it was such a weird film. I was like, I loved it, but there's something intangibly strange about it, which is the intangible strangeness of, I think, David Lynch's Twin Peaks season 3. It's got a similar sense of just the real and the sort of odd and the estranged and defamiliarized kind of operating. And there's certain scenes that really Lynchian, particularly where we got these musical interludes. You'll get a character kind of like when they're sitting around the table and they're playing guitar and singing.
This is the conjuring of music as well, or the conjuring of art as a sort of way,
and it's it's really compelling and it's really sort of passionate, but it's also deeply odd when we're experiencing these moments. And also the character's dialogue, at times he seems to be borrowing from Hollywood, I would say. So we get this friend Max, who's the kind of wisecracking, jaded old film editor, and it's kind of like a little bit of a bohemian wild card, and he's got this he kind of fulfills this trope like role within the film of like the knowledgeable expert friend or technical geek in a way. So he's like the if it was James Bond, he'd be like the Q of this director's world, because he has the gadgets and the know-how, and he comes in as this kind of white knight at the last minute to come and screen this film. And so there's certain things about it that are quite formulaic, but they're not in a heavy-handed or flat-footed way, but actually serve the film as this kind of this Fabergé egg of layers.
Yeah. The thing that struck me the most, actually, and we it's not unusual to see someone in their 80s directing a film. I mean, Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon would fall into this category. But there is something about the fact that he really is making a film about retirement or about like end of life or about that sort of emptiness, the way that, you know, there's this beautiful bit where Ana Arias, the daughter of the missing actor, kind of says, she describes her job at the Prado, the gallery in Madrid, and she says, "Oh, you know, it was fun for a while, but now I'm reading out the same information about the same paintings every day. Kind of gets boring." You know, there's a real, and then he goes and visits like an old flame who he'd shared with this actor, and you know, there are just these moments of looking back, and you know, it is a bit like it's not a value judgment, but like when you hang out with very old people who don't do very much with their lives. You know, they talk a lot about the past,
the glory days.
Exactly.
You know, it's this evocation of this supposedly better past that was probably inferior, but because of the power of nostalgia and the power of evoking it through memory.
And the film, the unfinished film that the whole film revolves around, has this kind of extraordinary part of its aura, I suppose, is that it was never finished, so it
died young.
Always had the potential to have been a masterpiece.
This is the thing. The actor who goes missing, he has stepped out of the flow of time in some senses, where all these other characters have been condemned to advance with the monotonous flow of time and inevitability towards death. And the thing is, the question leaves, it remains ambiguous whether the missing actor, who they believe they find working as a handyman with amnesia, another great kind of Hollywood trope, deployed here with real, like,
much better than Memory by Michel Franco, which I did defend when it was being pilloried by George, but I would say this was a more sensitive portrayal.
But yeah, so when we finally encounter this man, and it's this kind of road trip element to the film then, and we go to the coast, and he's working as a handyman in this sort of shabby but well-meaning sort of care home or hospice run by nuns, and then we get the whole gang kind of enters this space, and you know, the film director is trying to see in this man his friend, you know, to identify him, and he believes it's him, and then to try and, I suppose, shock him into realization of who he really is. And it's sufficiently ambiguous that this man, this character, it's not determined whether it is him or not.
I mean, it is him. It definitely is,
but it doesn't say it
because he's got the picture of the child.
He's got the child, but there's never. Okay, so there's.
But meaningfully, it sort of isn't, because his whole memory has been erased. Yeah. And so it's always about this. There's this beautiful thing where he says, you know, that you have to. You know, he talks to like a neurologist, doesn't it? Dr. Benavides. He talks to this like guy, and this guy's like, well, he won't be able to remember contexts, but he'll be able to remember sensations and
emotions.
So then he feelings. So he starts. So like his first attempt to sort of resolve or uncover this is he does these sailor's knots in front of him, and then the guy, exactly, and the guy can do the sailor's knots absolutely flawlessly without thinking about it, and then he sort of shows them a picture of them in the Navy together, and the man says, "Oh yeah, but that's not me. That's not you either."
Yeah, he says that's not us.
And it's sort of like an amazing, and it sort of blindsides the guy, because it's like it's not going to be that simple.
He's basically denying the past, which is the one thing this character can't do, because he's consumed by the past.
Yeah, because it's I could have been, this guy's a writer. There's this bit where he finds a copy of his book with his own dedication, like hand signed to a former flame, just in a kind of flea market charity shop, and then he buys it and gives it back to this woman who's now got has had two husbands since they were together.
Yeah, these are amazing senses of trying to sort of integrate past, present, you know, or to try return to the past as they're being flung mercilessly.
Yes, actually, I didn't think about it at the time, but it's the perfect conflict for that protagonist to deal with someone who refuses to remember, because all he can do is remember, and because he's a filmmaker as well. I mean, this is actually God, we need to append our discussion about tendency for films to be about filmmaking that we discussed in our last podcast, because this is yet another film that very much reflects on the filmmaking process. But most notable for me at this point is the fact that actors and directors often have, there are actor-directors, but often actor-directors have a funny antagonistic relationship, because I think in order to be a good actor, you sort of have to be in the moment and to not be self-conscious and not to be thinking about what will it look like on here. And to be a good director, you have to be constantly planning ahead and imagining, while also responding to things that happen in the moment. But there's a lot of looking forward to and planning ahead and stuff.
Yeah.
Me and my flatmate Ollie were reflecting. I do this diary film, and we were talking about how he takes a lot of photographs and never develops the film. And I was talking about how I'm constantly like looking through footage and like trying to wrangle it, and these different approaches to sort of looking forward to or living in the moment, like the past and the present. And I thought this film, like, actually, I didn't think about it at the time, but it was having this effect on me of making me think about, the position of the actor as someone who's sort of impervious to the record keeping of film.
Yeah, the indexical nature of film, which is stored and protected. And Max, who is this editor, is also a film conservationist. And, it's
at the cold face of the recording.
And
he makes this remark about how everyone's putting stuff on hard drives, but his film is the real thing.
He's a real purist and textualist, but obviously his job again is to mummify the past, which is exactly what the daughter is doing. So it's another institution like the museum which freezes an aspic. These things of beauty which are actually very fleeting. It's like that jelly stuff.
Oh, the silica gel thing you're not supposed to eat.
No, you're supposed to eat aspic, but it tastes like shit.
Oh.
They used it in the 70s to like use those kind of like disgusting displays of like fruit and vegetables
to
and
keep
meat.
it.
It's really horrible stuff.
But don't eat it if you see it in those packets.
Yeah, don't eat silica gel. That's official health warning. Unless you want to kill yourself, in which case, sure.
We don't endorse ending your life.
No, we don't. So there's various characters who are trapped or locked in this kind of hall of mirrors of the past. Max is one of them because he preserves these films that no one wants to watch. He says no one has the equipment to screen these anymore. There was a great moment of emergent physical comedy and meta-textual comedy with this, because when I started watching this film at the Picture House Central, the framing was off. So
it's so terrible. I was in a different screening, but more on that later.
So I was there. So basically, I was there, and it meant that half the subtitles were cut off on the film. So they had to reset and start again. It was, very embarrassing for.
Did you get past the film within a film?
No.
Okay.
So we kind of relived it again. It was quite interesting. We weren't aware yet. But then the funny thing is, Max later on says this thing he makes a joke where he's like, oh, well, no one's got the equipment to screen these films anymore. And when they do, they never get the framing right. It was just everyone in the room's just like laughing out.
True.
But it's great. It's this very, that also obviously wasn't planned, but the film manages to be so truthy that it can kind of anticipate. It's very self-aware and it's very aware of and it's really surprising to see someone who's 81 who's able to so fleet-footedly switch between registers in this kind of quite tabular way. Particularly his evocation of this unsolved cases. It's really bold choice to start a film in this gauzy, grainy, soft, buttery film. Yeah. And then to switch into this like Netflix style cold office block. And it's actually shot for those sort of portions relating to the unsolved cases. It's actually shot quite flat and he's kind of ugly almost.
And it's filmed like they filmed the TV show where he's interviewed, and they filmed the interview almost it feels like it's in its entirety.
Yeah, it's got that kind of daytime TV, hyper reality.
They have like an LED screen behind, and everything is
too sharp.
Exactly.
Yeah, we just have something very soft, which is the past, because it's memory, and we have the present, which is harsh and real.
It's also compositionally just so on it. I mean, every shot has like something beautiful going on in the background. There is like a bit too much rain. It keeps raining all the time, which I don't know. I just assume it doesn't rain that much in Spain, but whatever. The rain in Spain stays mainly in the frame.
But I mean,
everything.
And we get little kind of digressions. He believes he knows what's happened to this actor about how he went missing, and he kind of confects this again as another film within a film, really, which is this kind of reflection on how he might have staged his suicide, because a pair of shoes were found by the side of a cliff, and his coat, presumably with his identity papers in it.
There is this scene where his last moments, as it were, are kind of restaged.
Yeah, and it's that I think
that's just about comes off. Yeah, I was just slightly like, oh, this breaks the rule, but actually,
I think it's good because it's a reverie and it's an imagination. It's a hope as well.
Face.
Really,
there is something great, like very truthy about how like the actor's face is like somewhat more interesting than the director's face, which is like a classic thing that directors and actors often like the you get it even with like what was this, Shiva Baby? The director of Shiva Baby is like a less interesting looking Rachel Sennett, like like almost every like Herzog and Kinski, like every
and they were rivals
like
for this woman's love.
Truffaut and actually Truffaut is pretty handsome, but
Yeah,
Truffaut and Jean Pilet, like the director is always like channeling their spirit into someone with a really
with the
striking
riz in the
visage.
face, and I think
Visage.
visage, and they do have the in some ways they are best friends, but they're also
Rivals,
love
yeah.
rivals, and they're creative rivals, and they're also there's all resentment there as well because what was this man really? Who was he running from? And this obviously by the same measure, this by disappearing this actor. So the director believes has sort of ruined his chances to have a really strong cinematic career. He never made a film again. But it shows how interdependent he was with this other person, how symbiotic in a way, and their disappearance was hobbled him.
Horrible sense of missed sort of, if only, shoulda, woulda, coulda, There's a real sense of the tantalizing sense that the film, within the film, is so much more like profound and noble and beautiful than what you're watching, and yet the way that what you're watching for most of the film situates the film is part of the effect of it. It has this very tantalizing recontextualizing power, all of that bit in the middle, even though a lot of it is quite, it's a long film, it's basically 3 hours, and it does spend a lot of time just with these people slowly unpacking the past, which I normally wouldn't recommend for a 3-hour film to because a lot of
it become quite heavy, sodden, I think, but it doesn't hit because it's so fresh in how he switches up the register
exactly,
and even with, and it has a very satisfying yet ambiguous. So, spoiler alert for anyone that wants to watch this film and enjoy it, and it's untrammeled beauty. So, at the end of the film, we get a screening. So, another film within a film.
So this is his second attempt to somehow find in this actor something that proves that he is who he was before he lost his memory.
He arranges for a film celluloid screening of the surviving prints of this film, of the reels that
Max
were shot.
preferred
Method. We have no digitalization here. We're going to screen it for real. And they go into a sort of, it's like a Simon Lang Goodbye Dragon Inn kind of situation.
Dilapidated old Kino house that's been shuttered up for years.
And then it's kind of again, the gang gets back together. It's a real kind of, sort of...
the woman from the TV show shows up. Everyone's
there. All these various people. Well, they're the ghosts of the past in some ways, and you might say these people are just the memories that are gathering of this person's life. It's who do you think is Mark Parkinson or something? But they gather in this room to screen the film. Again, that is something that featured prominently in Spirit of the Beehive. This screening of
El Sur as well, that revolves around a kind of cinema. Someone who goes to a cinema I haven't seen it for a while, but some character goes to the cinema to kind of cover up something else. The child follows the person into the cinema. The cinema plays like a role as a sort of as a bit and as an abyss in which things are kind of like secrets are hidden.
And this is it. It's a space of intense magic and speculation. And the film is shown
quite cleverly. The plot of the film within the film revolves around. You can easily pass how only these two fragments, the beginning and end, remain of the film because they're shot in the same location. But but the middle section of the film is not. It was never shot because of this disappearance at this particular point. So you see this. You see at the beginning of the film, and then at the end of the film, you see the end of the film. And it makes sense why there are only these fragments of the film exist.
Exactly. So it's kind of narratively cogent within its own world. And I think so. We get this screening of the film, and we see this final scene, which we've not seen yet.
Yeah.
So we're also seeing it for the first time, and it's a very strange film in some senses.
Can I just overshadow this with my opinion?
Always, as a podcast, is the point.
I thought this was just the most astonishing 5 minutes of film that I saw in the whole festival.
Yeah, 100%.
I had tears in my eyes. They were formal tears. Ladies and gentlemen, I was so crying happy at how beautiful the filmmaking was.
Thank you.
Also, there was an emotional topic. There's various forms.
It was very sentimental and schlocky, but in a good way.
But it combined the effect of it was like a sort of somewhat schlocky film that, in its context, reached profundity through its melodrama, and also you're watching someone kind of you're watching several people blankly, in one case blankly receiving, or you're not quite sure, ambiguously receiving what's being shown. So there's a kind of restrained version of what's happening on screen, of this like reuniting or possible discovery of a face, of the farewell gaze, and then there's this like very over the top melodramatic cinematic rendition of it. The two are combined in this extraordinary collage, interlaced, imbricated, concertinaed,
accordioned.
And it was just phenomenal. And I was
so magnetic, that end of that film. Like it really earned that kind of payoff, that coup de grace. And I think there was something at that point. It enabled this situation, this world that it created, to live forever. It was like a sort of tuning fork that just doesn't stop ringing almost. It was like, ding, it set this thing up. Because at the end, it didn't go for the neat ending, which is, I remember who I am. What the fuck have I been? And it didn't do, no, sorry, I don't remember. Yeah. We just see him, and again, a beautiful bit of neatness. Close his eyes.
I will say,
focused on his face, and he closes his eyes.
As a critic, you do have these, and I don't know if normal people have this. Normal film spectators have this.
Sadly, really normal.
But but like, because I think we have such a clear and often quite dogmatic idea of what films should and shouldn't do.
Sorry about that.
There is like there are moments where like you're worrying. I had this very much with How to Have Sex, and with Zone of Interest actually, where you're like, think, oh please don't do this, or like this film would be perfect as long as you don't then do that, or like you're sort of predicting what like the film could do wrong, and then you have this extraordinary catharsis when the film does exactly the right thing, or does something you hadn't thought of.
What I was doing when that was happening, I literally had my literally had my hand squeezes around my leg, and I was like, don't do it. I was like leaning forward in my chair. I was like, don't fucking do it, don't fucking do it, don't fucking do it. Just like end the film here, end the film here, end the film here.
He did it
exactly
perfectly.
What he does.
He does it perfectly.
It was such a relief.
And it fades down, and then the title card, which you actually haven't seen in the film. Because the title card you see at the beginning is the title card for the film within a film. And then the actual film ends, and then close your eyes, and the credits. Very beautiful music. And it reaches an extraordinary crescendo.
Yeah, the last thing we see is his face.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like a death mask in some senses. And it's like, it works like, it functions, operates, whatever, so many simultaneous levels, and does all of them well. As a coda to a career, as the beginning, it's an Ouroboros with his filmmaking. It takes us right back to the spirit of the Beehive. It does all the great things about it. Acknowledges, like I said earlier, the kind of inherent trickery and magic of film.
Yeah.
Whilst at the same time, speaking to this kind of galvanized, strange substance that film is. Beyond the gelatin.
Yeah.
And I think, it kind of had me thinking about this Henry James thing about Tolstoy, about these big novels, these big, important, interesting novels, and he talks about them as baggy monsters.
Yeah.
These kind of queers, he calls them strange. Beings that kind of thrash around and sometimes kind of stumble and step, and they're very, thorny and strange and faceted. And that's kind of what he's created here. It is a loose and baggy monster, as Henry James says, but it's like such a delight. And I think my excitement about watching it was like, sometimes I sit there and I look at all the films I love, like really, really love, I think, fuck, what if no one makes films like this anymore? What if that is gone and we just have like, okay, films for the rest of the time? That's a really traumatic thought. And then you see a film like this, you're like, no, fuck, it's still possible to make a film that is as good as, Tarkovsky or whatever, can still do that.
But what I actually thought was interesting, and it made me like reassess or reaffirm our conversation in the last episode about how so much young indie film is sort of about filmmaking, and that not that I have an issue with this, because I like all the films that we talked about, but that it was interesting that the stuff I was really getting energy from did have this self-reflexive quality.
Yeah.
But I didn't expect an 84-year-old Spanish filmmaker to also deliver this kind of deliver something which it was at a absolutely on par with some of the greats of the 20th century, but it was also very different and very contemporary.
So extremely contemporary.
Very,
not afraid of its contemporaneity. Other films might have, this film wouldn't have worked if it was all shot like this kind of bracketing film, this older film. If it was all shot in film, and I thought I was so taken aback in a way when we switched into digital, like flat digital, and I was like, but at the same time, I was like, no, this crazy old bastard. That's exactly correct. This is perfect. This is like, he can use these and perfect these different forms really well. It made me think of Quince Tree's Son in some senses, because the real thing about that, the most interesting thing, is not this old artist rattling on. It's the method of how he's painting this quince tree. He paints it over a summer, and as the quince tree sort of begins to die a bit over the summer, he obviously has to kind of try and remember where all the quince fruit on this tree were. So he paints these little white lines on the fruit, so he can kind of tell how far they've dipped each day. So by the end of the painting, there's the painting on his pad, and then there's all these quince fruit that have got all these white lines on them, so you can see how much the tree's been dipping and decaying. And again, there's this amazing sense of the film is doing that. It's showing itself, it's showing its trickery and its workings out. It exists in 2 separate places or 3 separate places simultaneously. He's the most smart filmmaker, one of the most smart filmmakers working today. And he's only barely working today because he's only released one film in the last 30 years. Yeah. And I don't know.
I think there are other filmmakers.
No, there are.
There are lots of great filmmakers working today, I think.
No, there are. I'm not denying there aren't great filmmakers, but it feels like the one that's most in command of the whole toolkit.
Yeah, there was a real sense of mastery at that screening, but it was funny because I think lots of the central section. It filled me with great anticipation. I mean, I didn't check the time once. I was absolutely rapt. No. But it did have like this real like glacial, like it was quite quite literary. You're really uncovering things slowly, like not quite sure where it's going, and then it kind of like really slots into this. It uses like quite and it's not kind of gimmickry at all, but it really slots into this. Like that final 5 minutes is just an absolute masterclass, and I don't think you'd feel what you feel with that if you didn't see the first 2.5 hours. But
no, it's weird because it's like the great power of that film is. I know we're really really gassing this up, but it deserves it. But it's like in that last Serge Dany in his last piece for Kahir writes. He was talking about the films of our childhood that watched us. He's talking about this capacity for film to watch us, because it's sort of activating sublimated memories and sort of penetrating beyond our consciousness into our subconsciousness, but also the unsettling thing when you're in front of a great film like this, where you do feel a little bit uneasy before it, in a way, and that's the capacity of really, really great cinema, I think, is to feel kind of observed rather than just to feel like a spectator. And I think this film does that. It's doing stuff to you, which is interesting, and it's kind of getting itself into your head in really interesting ways. It's so good. Definitely feels like a film like, I don't know, it's a cinema film. This is one you go
go see it in the cinema. It's released by New Wave Films again, like Totem. Not quite the same urgency to see it on opening weekend because Aretha is not a kind of up and coming spring chicken. But definitely go see it.
100%.
Yeah, and so
do you want to talk about Pedro Costa?
One final thing I should say, and I'll keep it brief because the film itself is brief. It would be a bit of a crime to talk about this film for longer than the film itself actually lasts. It is a 9-minute film called Daughters of the Fire. Pedro Costa, I think, absolutely a filmmaker deserving of his own return to form episode. Maybe we'll do that at some point. I'm kind of running through a lot of the greats. I watched Force Money the other night. He is a very unconventional filmmaker, almost an eccentric. It was great to see him in discussion with Victor Erice at the ICA. Their films were in discussion the previous night, which is where I saw them both at the London Film Festival. The following day, they had this kind of awkward. They sort of opened the talk by saying, "Oh, it's difficult when filmmakers talk to each other," and recounting the funny stories about how Ingmar Bergman, whenever he met Tarkovsky or Woody Allen, they just wouldn't say anything because he felt so self-conscious. So filmmakers who admire each other when they hang out, sometimes it's not quite as sort of riveting as a podcast. But they both said very profound things about the state of cinema. They both talked a lot about the preciousness of images and not overusing. I mean, some of it I think almost slipped into kind of boomer attention economy chat, and perhaps I fall on the more Godardian kind of collage image book approach, but I found their insights and wisdom very engaging and affirming. Pedro Costa, if you don't know who Pedro Costa is, he's a Portuguese filmmaker who early on in his career settled on a particular community of people in a sort of slum adjacent, sort of on the outskirts of Lisbon. In his film Colossal Youth, the kind of transition from that slum to more
it becomes sort of rationalized,
more
cleaned up,
more kind of newly built dwellings kind of occurs.
This is the community of Fontainebleau.
Fontainebleau as well. Yes, exactly. And then yes, you see that. So they're displaced and then dispersed, but he still follows these people. And Daughters of the Fire is a musical. It takes on a triptych form.
Fuck off.
It is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the thing we got to remember about Pedro Costa, it probably is what I should have said at the top line, is he loves Hollywood. He loves excess. His lighting is always very expressive, and he likes to work with high contrast. He likes to be very deliberate and also likes to separate things within the frame and compose images almost like there's a kind of mechanicalness in the way that Bresson uses the edit. I feel Pedro Costa
He's very Rembrandtian.
I think. Uses paint, uses light, and is exactly like a painter. But in such a way, there's such deep blacks that things that pop out, like someone's cheek or kind of a reflection of a light or something on the wall, kind of independently of each other, kind of stand out. So appreciated this hugely. Yes, it's a musical. It features 3 women in 3 different frames, singing about their pain. Essentially, I believe the music is Bach. It's accompaniment to Bach and operatic accompaniment.
An aria.
Yeah, an aria. Yeah, I think it's an aria. I don't know, but it's very good. It made me very inspired and excited. I obviously immediately then watched Close Your Eyes. So I mean, it was 9 minutes. It was very short.
Oh, was it? So it was like a
double
bill. At a Amuse-Bouche before.
Yes, well, it's a proof of concept for a feature that he wants to make. So the idea is the next Pedro Costa feature will be a musical. It will be made possibly in this triptych format. The color was extremely rich. It felt a bit like being in a church and looking at kind of 3 very rich, colorful stained glasses. It's very iconographic imagery. It's from what I can tell, what I assume of Costa's work, it is once again about people from this community. It's I think what he said in the introduction, if I'm not mistaken, broadly, he was saying, the situation of these people has gotten worse, and to totally beautifully, brilliantly counterintuitive, counter to the absurd rationalism of our social realist directors like Loach. He said that the plight, the more extreme the plight, basically, the bolder and more like ambitious and almost fantastical the way I depict this should be. So it's sort of filmed. It's filmed sort of on like exploding lava almost. It looked like there's a bit on a mountain. I assume this is like reminiscent of the Cabo Verde
making
mountain.
me thinking of makes me think
of
sort of Gaspar Noé's treatment with Lux Eterna.
Lux Eterna, yeah. Actually, it is a bit like that. Yeah, it has this quality.
Because that's quite a hypnotic, kind of like a hyper poppy, vibrant film. In its own way.
And there is a final section which is just one channel, which is just sort of celluloid footage of Cape Verde, which I wasn't like but it was like an important respite after this very charged triptych section, which really has the eyes dancing around.
I like this kind of symphonic approach to filmmaking. Actually, there's this idea. If you're listening to a symphony, you do get rest and you do get moments of lower energy, and there's no reason why film shouldn't treat you the same thing. If you're
Costa
really
always has. I mean, his horse money I was watching last night. The guy was like doing when I said horse, I was like doing the thing because that's all the Portuguese. Horse money, because I'm trying to say Costa, not Costa, like the coffee brand. But yes, it's horse money has the same quality of really going through movements, and you sort of arrive in a Pedro Costa film. You arrive at a movement, and you're like, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. Some stuff is going to happen, and then then you move on to the next thing, and it's a beautiful way to make films, and I hope he lives at least as long as Erice has lived, and I hope he makes more films He's
for
already made
sure.
more films than Victor Erice, but
By
yes.
far,
But he
yeah,
did
yeah.
say a funny thing where he
Mm.
said, "Oh, he was paying tribute to Victor Erice, and he says, he's like, you don't have to make that many films. There are already many films. Victor, he's only made 4, but they are 4 brilliant films.
It's true.
It's just true. Where is the lie?
Mm.
Very true. So yes,
Um,
I don't know where people will get the opportunity to see Daughters of the Fire because
I
it's only
suppose
9
online
minutes. So I guess
somewhere.
it will find its way online
it'll be on
perfectly.
Mubi or something. Like that.
Yeah, it would be good to see it on Mubi actually. But yes, great film. Just an exciting trailer almost for. It's funny. He made a very rude comment about the BFI trailer that screened before the screening. He was like, I thank you to the BFI. I don't want to say this, but the trailer is terrible.
Yeah, it's really bad. I only went to one public screening during the festival.
There's just loads of like fast clips. It's kind of has a funny like momentum to it, but it just.
I think all
it's
of
so
these festival
corporate,
trailers, it's probably worthwhile
Yeah.
someone at some point studying the kind of the emergent genre of the kind of
The
festival
festival trailer,
trailer. It's this
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of hype piece to the
Just
festival.
ripping the richness out of like
100
different clips from films
Yeah.
that happen to be showing at the same festival.
whilst celebrating, saying something about this host city and saying
Yeah.
something about the institution that's graciously funding the
that too.
activities. But it's raw propaganda.
It is.
But I mean, that being said, we've had actually a very spirited and very successful LFF.
We have.
We saw so much.
We've enjoyed ourselves greatly. Our next stop as a podcast is probably to talk about directors again, as we normally do.
Well,
Jean Eustache.
John Moustache.
Jean Moustache.
We need to go back to John Moustache because we saw The Mother and the Whore relatively recently. Before the memory of that fades.
Yeah, the
I
BFI
think we ought
season.
to. I might have to watch it again.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It'll come back to you.
It will.
Yes, we might do a season on him, and we might do a season on Pedro Costa, as just
I would like
previously mentioned by me.
Yeah.
But yes, we've already been running for a very long time, so yes, good festival.
Yeah, good festival. Thank you for joining us for this trilogy and probably like 5 hours of
true.
collective conversation.
For
But
the head.
if you need to fall asleep to a podcast, this is
Yeah, I think we're pretty good
this
for
is
that.
the one.
We don't suddenly start shouting at any point. So.
Apart from we get very excited about a film, which isn't that
Yeah.
often. So it's
Well, I think we
Yeah.
talked quite positively.
we loved several of the films we saw.
Bad news for people who say
Mm.
about this podcast. Just love it when you hate something. Just love it.
Don't worry, we'll do some shit soon. It's
But,
fine. We'll
yeah.
do the fan service of
Generally, optimist.
always.
Yeah.
Till I die.
Gotta be. As James Baldwin says, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive.
On that note, bonne nuit. Thank you for joining us, and see you later.
See you later.